Hi, I'm Peter Škoda and I'm tech lead at Kentico Kontent. And this is my opportunity to speak about product discovery from the development team's perspective. So before I start, let me confess with something. I wasn't sure what product discovery is and how it actually affects my day at work. And why is that? Well, the product discovery sounds more like PM stuff, right? This is more for product management. Or is it for UX designers, like UX stuff? And I think that most of the developers don't even know how it can relate to their work and how it can influence they at the office. Well, as Tomáš already mentioned in his presentation, the dev teams in Kentico Kontent are part of the product discovery process. And before I jump into how it affects my work, I need to start with why. Why we are actually part of the product discovery and what it brings us. And the answer is ownership. Well, Tomáš mentioned that the dev teams in Kentico Kontent are responsible for the success of the feature. And by success, I don't mean that it's just technically perfect, that it is performant and it is scalable. But the true success of the feature is that the feature is used by customers and it actually solves some of the customers' needs. And of course, it's important that the feature has the right user experience so that the users are having the right experience along the way. But for the dev teams to actually achieve that, they need to be empowered to do the decisions because they need to shape the feature that way it has the biggest impact to the customers. And it means they need to make the right decisions when working on the feature. And for that, they need all the possible context so that they know what is most important and what is less important. And as you can as you can see, I'm getting to the product discovery slowly because that's the thing where the development team is getting their context. This is where the jobs to be done are discussed. This is where the goals and desired outcome is discussed as well. So this is why we as developers are part of the product discovery process. And let me jump into the process and explain it briefly once again. So on top of the graph, there is the alignment, and Tomáš already mentioned this is where we discuss the goals of the feature. These are the outcomes, eventually key results, etc. Then we have explore and define and ideate. In these phases, we usually take part when we are researching competition, or we are discussing jobs to be done, or we are preparing the actual solution for the feature. Next, there is the creation phase, which is actual implementation of the feature, which is the usual work of the developers. And last but not least, the measurement phase. And in here, we are basically measuring the impact of the feature to our customers. So let's jump into the first phase, which I have the alignment here. In alignment, we are discussing the desired outcomes and the goals of the feature. And for that, we use OKR's framework, which stands for objectives and key results. And I'm not going to talk about the framework and how you should properly define the key results for your projects. I just want to mention that since we as developers are taking part of this step, each of us understands the key results and the metrics for the feature to be successful. Also, every dev has some understanding of the related tasks. And what are those related tasks? Well, implemented feature by itself is not really enough for a feature to be successful. I mean, it can be more successful if you support it by other initiatives, for example, webinars or workshops, which is usually held by marketing team. Or you need to prepare, or someone needs to prepare a demo environment for sales guys. And these all are the tasks that help the feature to have bigger impact on customers. And I'm mentioning this because in a later phase, it will be important for the development team to have all of this information. But let me stop for a moment discussing my experience with key results. Well, sometimes or some key results are defined by the quantitative data of user interacting with your application. For example, a user is clicking on some button. So this is handled usually by some event tracking system, which can tell you how many times the event or the button was clicked by some user, for example. And this means you need to have some kind of tool in your application, and you need to gain the data out of it. And there are actually two scenarios. The first one is that you already have the data in place. You are tracking the events in your application and you feel like all the data are there and you're ready to go. Or the second scenario is that you need to obtain the data. And both of them are tricky in some ways. So let's discuss the first one. In the first one, you should make sure that you have the right data, because the original event has been added to your application with some purpose, which might be completely different than what your needs are currently. And it may happen that this event is not tracked in some different part of the application. And for example, there has been some recently added new page where the button is there as well. And even though the user clicks on the button, is it not reflected in your reports and de facto in your key results. So again, you need to make sure you understand the data properly and you know what you are actually tracking. For the second case, this might be not straightforward sometimes at all. Sometimes the key result is defined that way that you need to invest heavily into obtaining the data. For example, using a manpower so that it takes a lot of weeks to prepare the architecture, or you need to pay some money for a system which does the work for you. And you always need to consider this and think whether this is actually justified, because maybe slight altering of the key results will allow you to skip the implementation, and you don't need to invest heavily into obtaining the data. So think about the cost. So let's jump into the next phases, and these are explore, define, and ideate. And in these phases, what's different is that we are usually taking part in researching competition. And the reason is not that we just provide manpower to do that, because there is usually many competitions, but the thing is that we as developers get to see the real world. We are actually feeling the user experience of our competition. We can see how it's solved in their product, and we can learn a lot from that. Another thing that is that we are part of the discussions of jobs to be done. And even though this might be new to many developers, it's just important that we have the understanding of the customer's jobs. And this will be important in the next phase, which is the creation. So the creation is actually the implementation of the feature. This is basically where the development happens, and basically this is where the developers are doing their main part. And actually, in this part, the development team makes use of of the gathered context. And how is that? Well, having the context gives the team some benefits. And for example, the dev team can change the scope easily right now. And question is, why would we even want to change the scope while we are implementing the feature? Well, many reasons. For example, since we know what is most important and what is less important, and we slowly build the feature, we might see that some of the features are not really supporting the success of the feature at the end, and we might just see that this should be cut out of the scope. Also, and I believe that you are already familiar with this, development is never going according to the plan. There is always some challenge, and there might be bigger challenges, there might be small challenges, but at the end, some changes might be inevitable, and you need to consider this as well. So there are influences which makes the team to change the scope of the feature. And so how is this changing of the scope easier now? Well, the dev team knows what are the jobs and outcomes, what is most important, what is less important. The dev team can evaluate what part of the scope is easily to be cut. And this is important because at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to bring the feature to the world and to have the biggest impact possible. Also, there is less communication overhead. So what does it mean? Tomáš already mentioned that since development teams have all the possible context, they don't need to ask every tiny question to your PM. Basically, most of the tiny things we can solve within the team, and maybe we just let our PM or UX designer know that such a change is happening, and we just have a 5-minute call where we let them know, and it's done. Also, the dev team is responsible and empowered to do the changes in the scope. And it means that there is no need to go to stakeholders and ask for their permissions, because it's our responsibility, and they know it, and they just want to be informed about major changes which are strategic for the whole company. For example, changes in the release dates. All right, there is another benefit of having context, and is that when we were discussing the related tasks, we actually know what these tasks are and what teams are working on these tasks. So, for example, as before mentioned, workshops or webinars, we know that if we do some change in the scope or the release date, we can directly contact marketing team, let them know that their webinar needs to be moved or there is some change in the content of the webinar. So this also adds to the streamlining communication, that we don't need to contact multiple levels, and we just let the affected parties know. All right. This brings us to the last but not least phase, which is measure. And this phase basically happens once the feature is released to production and you are starting to see the impact of the feature to your customers. Hopefully there is some impact to your customers. And it needs to be said that the features do not live in a closed environment. Usually there are many other teams that are just currently building their features, and the source code of the application is always changed. And sometimes there are changes which are unwanted or which are hidden, and you are not aware of those. And it may happen that in your key results or in your reports that you are tracking, you see sudden changes of your data, and this might indicate that that you just released perfect feature which has great impact on your customers and everyone is happy. Well, that will be great, but usually that might indicate that the condition of events has changed and you need to check the underlying source of your data. So make sure you change it first and then open your champagne. So this actually brought us to the end of the discussions about how the dev teams are taking part in the product discovery process. And you might see that there are some benefits. Of course, we are delivering better product, which is more focused on a real customer's needs, but there is also the other side. And those are the additional requirements for developers or TLs. So what about devs and TLs? Well, since we are responsible, or eventually the TL is responsible for the success of the feature, we need to be closer to business. And it might be it might mean that TL or someone needs to be familiar with product management stuff, like frameworks or methods. For example, OKRs, opportunity solution trees, how might we questions, and etc. and many more. And usually those are not aware of such tools, so they need to learn these things. Also, it's quite usual sometimes to have a contact with customers. Recently, it's not so often, but anyway, this is part of our job. And usually, even though usually this is done by product management or UX designers, sometimes it might be most effective to just contact the customer directly. Yeah. Another thing is that not just TL needs to have business-oriented mindset. Since the whole dev team is taking part in the product discovery process, everyone needs to have customers in mind. And as I'm thinking about all these points, it's clear that this might not suit everyone. I can imagine developers who are only willing to spend their time with the technicalities of the feature, like the performance stuff, database, and etc. And those might not be really interested in the business side of things. But anyway, I think that development teams having taken part in the product discovery process was the right move. And I think at the end of the day, we are creating better product, which is more focused on the actual needs of the customers, and while developers have bigger impact on the product. And I believe that at the end of the day, developers have fulfillment of great work and great impact. So thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop a line. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. It was a great talk. I have a question for you, because you said it might not suit everyone. So I want to ask you, like, how was the transition for you personally? You know, going from not very involved developer to a person who actually is talking to users, who's very involved in this, you know, research process and stuff. So what about you?
Cool. Yeah. Well, fortunately, I don't need to speak to customers so much recently. But anyway, all this process was a little bit out of the comfort zone, of my comfort zone, as basically any other new thing that I need to do. But the important thing is that I understand the reasons behind it. That when we started with this basically experiment, I learned that it has these benefits quite quickly, and since I could see the results almost immediately, I was sold. So I knew that even though I need to do some things that are not comfortable to me, I just knew I need to do it. And
Yeah.
also I need to say that we are basically not owners of the whole product discovery, and I didn't need to learn everything. And actually, the product management and UX designers, they have the most knowledge about this process, and we as a dev teams are basically listening to what they have to say, and without them it won't be possible. So thank you, PMs and UX designers, for all your help.
You're welcome. So basically, what you're saying, it's not that much pressure. It's not just on you. So you're just like supporting the process. If I
Yeah,
understand it right.
exactly. Well, you definitely need to have great great PM and great user designer to help you with all the process.
Yeah.
That helps
I
a lot.
agree. Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much, Peter.